Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be devastated by a natural disaster? We hear stories all the time about the loss of life, injury, confusion, and devastation that goes with almost any major natural disaster. A catastrophic event can happen at any time, anywhere, and usually when you least expect it. If you fail to prepare for the unexpected, you're gambling with your life and ignoring your stewardship to your family. Your children are dependent upon you to protect and care for them. What will happen to them if you fail to prepare now? Through years of experience, Jim Phillips has developed the true needs and priorities that are essential for survival. Jim's quest for these truths began in the early 60s. Years were spent developing techniques and clothing that would allow people to make it no matter what they may be faced with. In the desolation of the Arctic, Jim and his father Gil put their knowledge and skill to the ultimate test, living unsupported for weeks at a time at extremes at the top of the world. Their findings proved what they had already come to know. You can make it no matter what, if you obey the laws of how and why things work. Whether you're at the top of the world or the unforgiving desolation of Death Valley, the laws still apply. In 1984, Jim was asked by the media to demonstrate his unique clothing system. How he was immersed in freezing water for 15 minutes, driving him into hypothermia. Jim remained in the cold, wet clothing with no heat or shelter and self-dried in just a matter of hours. This would have killed anyone else wearing traditional clothing. The systems and techniques developed by Jim captured the interest of the military. In 1986 and 1987, Jim spent time training and outfitting all branches of the U.S. military. Now here he is with the 6th Marine Division during their Winter War Games. In 1987, Jim personally trained and outfitted astronaut and Apollo 13 commander Jim Lovell for his North Pole expedition.
How's it compare to the moon?
Well, it's about the same, a little whiter, the moon's a little grayer, but it's about the same desolation as the moon, of course.
After the expedition, he said Jim Phillips' cold weather protection system is unlike any other available and is capable of providing indefinite protection in the most severe cold weather known to man. The system was so revolutionary, Jim Phillips received Popular Science's Best of What's New in Science and Technology Award for 1989. Thousands of people have benefited from classroom and field training provided by Jim Phillips. For many, it has saved their lives.
I can't think of a situation where I couldn't probably figure out some way to survive. It gets tough sometimes. I've been in situations that have been life-threatening. But the thing that you need is some knowledge and some experience. And if you just take your time and think, you can usually figure out what to do to take care of yourself.
My knowledge and my experience, the ability to make water, makes me safe, and I can live out here all the time. I'm in no danger. My life is not threatened, no matter what happens.
Welcome, everybody. Winter emergencies and disasters, and let me just define very quickly the difference between an emergency and a disaster. There is a big difference. Emergencies are things that happen all the time. We get stuck, the power goes off for a few hours or things like that. And we're all experiencing those things. Disasters, much more severe, things that are long-term. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on more is about the disasters, because if you're ready for a disaster, then emergencies are actually quite easy. Now, when we realize that winter happens, that's just bottom line. It happens every year about the same time. And dealing with winter is one of our challenges. And when I talk about being prepared to deal with things, it's about understanding the principles about how and why things work. It's not just about things that you buy, things, skills that you learn, stuff to store. It's all of those things. But it's important to realize that what you know is more important than what you have. And thinking about this as I've been developing these programs and thinking about going forward from where we are right now in this country and our lives right now, what is the biggest risk to you and to your society that you may face? Now, when I began teaching back in 1984, doing this formally as a profession in 1984, it was all about cold weather and winter. It was about snow camping. It was about the foam clothing. It was about winter emergencies. And when you're learning those things, there's all this stuff around this that come into play. Attitude was a critical part of that. Water and sanitation, nutrition, a big thing in there. All of those things I was talking about, and particularly I got to talking more in depth about them as I went to other people's classes, not just about winter classes, but then the people were not teaching some of these things in as depth. And so I started digging into them more and more. Out of that beginning in 1984 to what I have been teaching until recently is about these 9, what I call 9 Provident living modules: foundation, clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies. Everything that you need to know, do, and have for every day of your life, including emergency, is contained within those. And then surrounding that are all of the events. And rather than focusing on individual events, because somebody said, well, I'm getting prepared for earthquakes. Well, that's fine if you're prepared for an earthquake, but what happens when something else occurs? So it's really about understanding what can get us into trouble no matter what is occurring. So this is kind of the big picture. What you need to realize is that life is risky. You have to be ready to analyze the risk and take a look at it, because your safety and survival will depend on that. Because, well, you have to understand you can't get rid of risks is the bottom line. So the choices that you make will either reduce or will increase the risk that you would be facing. But realize that you can never eliminate risk. We have a society that wants everything to be perfectly safe, nothing bad can happen, or what have you. This is not true. If the early explorers, Columbus or anybody else, or the Vikings, if they were risk averse, we'd still be living in caves someplace is what would be happening. All right. So the decisions that each one of us make will contribute to the outcome of any disaster, how it's going to go for us. You see, where we live, how we live, what we do, what we don't do, all of those things come into play. So in this life risk assessment is what we're talking about. These are physical choices. A bunch of these are physical choices. But there's more to it than that. See, if you're in the big city high rise, that's one set of risks. If you live along the coast or in a canyon or a forest, it's another. And realize that in the big city high rise, you're more susceptible to gangs. Along the coast, well, tsunamis will happen there. I'm not too worried about a tsunami here. If you live in a forest, all forests eventually burn. Every forest that's ever existed has burned. Canyons always flood at some point. That's how they got formed. But what I want you to understand is you don't hold others accountable for the decisions and actions you make. Your decisions will determine how it's going to turn out for you. It's your responsibility. Okay. So there are other choices that feed into this risk assessment that we have to think. It's where you live, what you do, what you don't do. It's about your cultural mindset. It's some of your social habits. It may be the regulations in the area where you live. They say you can do this, you can't do this. It may be other people's agendas. It may be the laws around you that say, well, you can't do that at your house because, well, it's against code. So all of those things come into play, and you have to put them into your risk assessment, deciding how you're going to take care of things going forward. Then we come into these other things about your speech, about the games you play, the magazines you read, the people you hang around, associate with. All of those things will increase or decrease your risk depending on what they are. So thinking about those things as we start looking at this idea of the things that we face, I want you to keep that in mind. Now, the way I've looked at things for all my life and the way I teach things to people is about this. I call it the truth about life. There's no doubt that tomorrow will come. There's no dispute that things happen, but how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. That's the bottom line. How you're prepared, and if you're prepared for the worst. So I do worst case analysis, not because I'm in the gloom and doom, but because I want to say, if that is possible, if it's something that could affect me, What am I going to do about it? Or do I just want to say, well, it won't happen? And we can all make that assessment if we want that it won't happen. But then if it does, you got a problem. Okay. Our society, our culture, and our way of life is dependent, underline that word, dependent on our physical infrastructure, utilities, and services. You take a look around at our modern lifestyle and our society, it's dependent on all these things that I would call different grids, all this interconnection that we have. Those determine the quality of our life and how easy it goes. Hit one of these. Just take a look at the U.S. pipeline transportation system. This is a transportation. It's about moving crude oil, gasoline, natural gas, all those things all over the place in there. That's an infrastructure right there. Well, there's a whole bunch of infrastructures. They look like this. We have these things about the water, the communication, the power, the trucking, all of those things. And we have this extreme dependency on them because everything that you enjoy in this life, no matter where you live right now, is brought to you by one of those. And the big one that ties everything together is the power grid. It is the controlling grid that ties everything together. When the power grid goes down, everything else follows after that. Now, if it's just an emergency that shuts something down for a short period of time, okay, it comes back because the power trucks get out there, they put things back. But there's things that could shut it down for long term. Again, this is not gloom and doom, but it's kind of like, well, let's pay attention to this because we want to be ready for it. Now, there's nighttime pictures of what the U.S. looks like with all of the power that's going on. In that box down in the lower left-hand corner, that's Los Angeles. Lots and lots of electric power being used there. All right. So there are threats to our power grid that lead to its loss. And we can talk about those things. I do whole classes on those things, all the different ones. And there's confusion about some of those things, about EMP and CME, cyber attack, hardware vulnerability, all those things. I'm just going to touch on them, but we're not going to dig into them. A high altitude electromagnetic pulse, HEMP. We hear about that. One of those things launched up there that detonate a nuclear device 300 miles above the Earth. And if it's maximized to take out the power grid, it'll take it out. It isn't like it goes off and then it comes back. It's dead. It's gone. It's not coming back for years, is the bottom line. In some places, will all power be lost? Probably not. But do you know that you're going to be in a place where you still have power? So that's one of them that can take it out. We have this other thing, this coronal mass ejection. This is a super solar storm. We had one of those super solar storms back in 1859, the Carrington event that burned out the telegraphs. Well, we got a lot more stuff than telegraphs right now to be a real problem. We have other vulnerabilities that can come from physical attack. This is one that occurred in 2013 where there were some AK-47s fired into some transformers outside Medford, California in there and did millions of dollars worth of damage. Now, it was just one plant that was shut down or one set of substation that was shut down. So after a few hours, they were able to route around it. But if such an attack would occur at, say, 5 or 6 of these very central, very large ones, the power grid will be down. Not all power will be off, but we're not going to be all tied together. We have a whole bunch of other things. Well, war and invasion, we hate to think about that one, but we got some of this stuff going on. And I'll tell you what, there's some places in Europe where there's no power right now. Still, it's just local, but there could be something very broad, widespread. We could have multiple widespread severe disasters all at the same time, not just a regional thing, but could be global or it could be large areas in there. We have other things that we're hearing about, some of the weirding weather, climate changes and what have you. By the way, climate changes all the time. The records show that. Right now, we're in some kind of a change. It'll change again. But while it's going on, it can really have an effect on food supply and all kinds of things. Then you get into extreme famines, economic collapse, different things like that can occur. All of these things kind of end up in the same place, which can be to civil collapse, anarchy, what have you. Now, again, I want to emphasize, I'm not into gloom and doom, but these are realities we need to face because they will have effects on your ability to take care of your life in all of these areas because, well, it affects the power grid, which affects the transportation grid, communication grid, and all those things. And if that occurs in winter, like early November, and the power grid's going to be off all November, all year long, are you prepared to deal with that? That's the question that you want to ask yourself. So here again, if you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, there'll be an adventure. So let's dig into this winter problem, because it's very real, and it's overlooked. Because, well, we just don't have this problem because the utilities are on all the time. We have a warm space we can go. Of course, people realize when you're out there playing in the cold, when you're out, snowmobiling or sledding or driving cross country, you can get caught. Cars break down, avalanches close roads, things like that. Places where I've been, people get stuck. Most of these are just emergencies where it's short term because they're going to get the road opened back up, and the snowcats will be out from the state police and the rescue is coming. And so they're short term, but they can be severe. And it doesn't have to be very long for you to be hurt, you to be injured, you to be, well, end up dead. Some of the areas of the country, Buffalo and these that have this lake effect where they really get some storms and some snow can shut them down for quite a few hours in a few days. Of course, we had a couple of years ago down in Texas, they don't have deep freezes very often, but when it comes every 50 years or so, it actually was about 60 years ago from the last one that occurred, then it really catches people off guard because, well, it just hasn't happened. It doesn't happen very often. How'd you like to open your front door and see that looking out there? That's some serious snow. These things do occur, and I'm grateful for all the snow that we're getting. Think about the temperatures we've had in the area right now, going into a little bit of a deep freeze again. What if you had no power right now? How would you handle that? All right. Winter is not really taken very seriously, and people are unprepared for winter for several reasons. One of them is this ubiquitous infrastructure we have, all these utilities that we have, all the services, all the emergency things, natural gas, propane, fuel oil, all these things are being delivered all the time. It's wonderful to us. We have all this communications that we can call for help. We can radio. We can seek assistance out there. Then we have this transportation that works so very, very well. But it's the power grid. The power grid is the thing that provides it to us. So when you think about the power grid, when the power grid is down, how will that affect you? Okay, well, you can stand around looking at the thermostat, asking the question about, well, now what are we going to do, Martha? Because this thing is off. And a lot of people don't understand this, but when the power grid goes down, natural gas will go away. Our natural gas supply is dependent on the power grid. So the question that you want to ask is, what is the probability that you will lose your utilities for an extended period? What's the probability of that? Now, a lot of people will say, well, it just never happens, and that's the governments and the utility companies, that's their problem, so it'll get taken care of. So we have these short-term things that occur, and we don't have to worry about it. But I ask that question again, what is the likelihood? What is the probability that you may lose your utilities for a long period of time? And will you be ready to properly respond, or will you be caught trying to react to the problem? Now, there was a lot of reaction going on down in Texas here 2 years ago, back in February 2 years ago. And there's an article that's written about this, or one that I wrote for an individual. He asked me to put on his blog about people that are not prepared to deal with winter. Now, how you can find that article, you can go to his website. If you just go to my website, jimsway.com, click on the library, go to the clothing icon on there, and then just scroll down, and that'll link you over to that article that's on the civildefensemanual.com. And in that one, I was writing the concept of here, because he asked me, he said, people are not prepared. They haven't done anything. They don't know what to do. What should they do? So I took that approach in there. Of course, he wanted it to be short. So how do you boil that one down? You ought to read that, because I take a different approach than what you're going to see on YouTube. YouTube will show you all the little stoves you need to buy and how you get a bunch of candles and put them under a flower pot and some things like that around bricks and all these things. Hey, you ought to try those things for very long. They do a little bit, but when you really do a heat analysis of them, what they put out, they will not keep your house warm. But you'll see all those neat little tricks out there. So I wrote about some things that are very real that you can do if you understand them, if you're not prepared. Or let's say you're visiting somebody and the power goes out, they don't have any heat and the house is now cold. What could you then teach them to do while you're there? We have a very real need to stay warm, and we just take it for granted. And when things are cold around us, what we end up doing is we're going to go like, well, we'll just go down to the shelter because They got somebody down there with an emergency generator and heaters and everything, so you can go stand in line for the food and the shelter because you're dependent on them. You can hang out in the auditorium with 5,000 other really unhappy people. That's where I don't want to be. And oh, by the way, think about that in the winter with all the people sneezing and coughing in that room, and you're going to hang out with them. I do not want to be there. Stand in line to get the food and those things. That's okay. We appreciate those people when they do that, come to the rescue for the people who are unprepared. But I don't want to be unprepared. I don't want you to be unprepared to deal with it. So the winter threat is very real, and it's not just about discomfort. Now, I teach whole classes in this. I spend hours in these things. I'm just going to touch on them right now to help you understand what the threats are. A lot of people think about frostbite. That's a pretty nasty thing. That's frozen flesh while it's still on your body. That's not good. That's what it looks like on a child. This is a young child has black fingers from frostbite. That's what they look like about day 2, 3. Okay, now that child probably is not going to lose his fingers, probably lose some fingernails and things, but he will always be more susceptible to frostbite in the future. He has internal nerve damage and circulation damage, makes you much more susceptible to injury in the future. There's some feet that don't look good. Those toes are gone. Part of that foot is going to be lost. Now, you think about what's the problem with frostbite? Well, it hurts. And it's really bad if you lose some of your extremities, because that's part of what it's about. You know, you lose your digits and things like that. That's bad. Here's what loss of body parts look like. Now, this is after what's called auto amputation. These were frozen fingers that ended up being shed from that body. And that's not the worst thing that can happen, because the worst thing that can happen with frostbite that's untreated. Now, think about this. We're talking about when the system is down. This is long term. You don't have a hospital. You don't have a clinic. You don't have doctors. You don't have the antibiotics and things. Then the real problem is that. That's the infection that can set in after frozen flesh when it warms up and now it starts to decay. Now, that's what killed more people in the Napoleonic Wars and in Korea and other places. Was the cold injuries were more of a problem, and Napoleon had a huge problem with it when he was going across the mountains in there. Love to dig into that because it's fascinating. It's also a lesson to learn, but that's not the big problem. Hypothermia, hypo, lowered, thermia, temperature. This is lowered body temperature. That's what all it means is. And you need to understand how serious this is, because I call this the killer of the ignorant and unprepared. And it's something that you need to learn about. You need to understand this, because if you don't, well, ignorant and unprepared means you can get into trouble. You're at bigger risk of frostbite at above freezing than below zero. And we actually kill more people above freezing temperatures than below zero. Cold water exposure, sleet, rain, snow with the wind blowing, and you don't have good clothing and shelter, man, that's deadly. We kill about 600 people a year in this country from hypothermia that die from that. And of course, then there's other injuries that occur. All of us, I want you to emphasize, I believe everybody in this audience and all those that are listening in have experienced hypothermia. And sometimes I ask an audience, how many people put up your hands? A couple of hands come up. And then I ask the other question. How many of you have ever shivered in your life? That's hypothermia. Now, when you shiver and then you warm back up, it didn't hurt you, but you need to understand how it can deepen and get worse. So understanding hypothermia, what the symptoms are, when you must act and how to act, because you can get to a point where you cannot self-recover. You can't self-rescue. So if you just kind of tough it out and say, well, I'll be back to the car in a couple hours, we'll just keep going. That's where they find those people have died of, they used to call it exposure. They froze to death in the snow because actually they just went to sleep. Every cell in their body shut down, their reasoning shut down, and they just got beyond the point of no return, decided I need to rest for a little while. They didn't wake up. You don't want to be like that young boy in that picture to the right, in a coma. Now, those people are there to rescue him, getting to a place where he can be properly warmed up. And that's not necessary. It's life-threatening, but you can recover from that if it's done properly. Now, if it's not done properly, you won't recover, is the bottom line. So hypothermia is the killer of the ignorant and unprepared. Now, I'm not talking about hypothermia when you're stuck in the forest or in your car. I'm talking about hypothermia at home when you don't have any utilities. That's what I'm more concerned about for people. Now, hypothermia is insidious. It's subtle. See, we've all been cold. We've all shivered. We've all been miserable. It's really unpleasant, but we got over it. So it's like, okay, I'm just cold again, big deal kind of a thing. But it will sneak up on you, and you can find yourself in big trouble before you really recognize it if you're not aware of what's going on. And then you can get into a problem where if you don't properly respond at this point and take the proper actions, you don't make it unless somebody is there to rescue you. That's the bottom line. Hypothermia is also likely the main cause or contributing factor to all of the other winter injuries and deaths. Here's the reason why. This is why hypothermia is so critically important to understand. Your cognitive functions are offline. Sometimes it's described as the wires are down in your brain. Because as your brain becomes chilled out a little bit, realize your brain will never feel cold. It senses the cold, but it won't shiver. It's going to take some actions to try and keep it warm. But what happens is your responses are slower. You can't think. You're distracted by the cold. When you have whole body cold that's getting you into hypothermia, it's in your face. You can't get away from it. You're miserable. You're defocused. And then you're not thinking clearly. So now you make mistakes. You're in a hurry to get away from it. There you are in your car, on your snowmobile, someplace on snowshoes, and you want to get away from it. So I'm going to do something to get out of here right now. That's when you make mistakes, because all you can think about is, I got to get away from it. So you're in a hurry, and you're also very, very, very tired. Now, I've experienced hypothermia from the inside. I understand what it is. I've been in life-threatening hypothermia. As a matter of fact, I probably shouldn't have survived the one hypothermia case because of where it was, but there was a reason why I did. And it's part of why, when I teach hypothermia and about it, why you need to pay attention to some of these things. So hypothermia is one of the most serious threats that you face in winter because of its distraction, because of the fact that you want to get away from it, you're miserable, you make mistakes. You have a need to stay warm. That's the bottom line. And being cold, it's like a black hole. And it's a threat that'll creep up on you, and it'll suck you into oblivion before you know what's going on. So that's why we want to stay warm. Well, what actions can you take so you can always be warm? Well, move to the tropics, stay in a heated structure, have multiple sources of heat, never go any place where you don't have any heat. But can you guarantee that? That's the question. Can you guarantee it? Now, utilities go down, everything's going to be cold around you. Then, as a matter of fact, the rescue centers are all going to get cold. You're out on the road, you get stuck, cars break down. I don't know about you, but mine break down more in the winter than they do in the summer. Then we have different kinds of things that can occur in the winters. We live on this earthquake-prone areas here. Just because it's winter, does that mean that earthquakes won't occur? They can and will occur in the winter. They do, and they have in other parts of the world. And then we also, we were going to go to the tropics and stay warm, or I was going to get into a warm building or a car, but I can't always get there. If you're prepared for the worst, then it can be an adventure. So let's talk about living without utilities in the winter. Let's focus on that concept, realizing that these 9 areas, everything you need to know, do, and have for your well-being today and every day of your life is contained within these. I won't dig into them very deeply, but just understand the foundation is very much about your attitude, how you think, what your outlook is, and it's also about your planning and thinking. It's about clothing, and clothing is number 2 on this list. First, it's attitude. Attitude is number 1 on that, because if you have this, I hate winter, I don't like winter, I don't want to be cold, now you are cold and you're in the middle of this thing and you want somebody to fix it, you deserve having it fixed. Why aren't the people coming to fix it? It's very interesting to listen to people when they're in trouble. They're blaming it on somebody else. Why aren't they taking care of me? That's an attitude problem. Anyway, that'll kill you faster than anything else. Second on this list is clothing when we're talking about winter, because clothing is your personal portable shelter, and that's what I'm going to be talking a lot about. But it's also about water, because you need to understand about water in the winter and how critical that is. Then we get into sanitation, because hey, if you have the warm clothing and you have all the water, but you got dysentery, diarrhea while the system is down and there's no clinic to go to, well, that isn't going to do you any good, because you can dehydrate out within a few hours and die from cholera very, very quickly because of how it dehydrates the body. Then it's nutrition, yes, shelter, wellness, tools, supplies, all those things. Your backup heat is no more reliable than your current utility-supported primary heat. Some people say, well, I got some backup heat. Well, in the long run, now short run, okay, it's supported because you have this pile of coal. Well, when they can no longer deliver coal or wood or no longer deliver the propane to you, how long is that going to work is the bottom line. And then people will think about, okay, well, I can have a stand-down generator, this standby generator, one right outside this building right here, comes on when the power goes off. That's great. That's wonderful. It's run on natural gas. Natural gas, when the power is off, and it's really off all over the place, natural gas is likely to be off within a couple of 3 days or maybe up to a week, 2 weeks. In some places, depending on where it is, you may still have natural gas. Some places it's going to go down within a day or two. So your natural gas generator may in fact go away when the power grid is down all around. Let me point out something else in this area, since I deal with thinking about how bad could it get, and I want to warn some people about some things. And so let's say you have your stand-down generator, or you have solar panels on your house and batteries, so you still have lights. Well, that's really nice, except that now becomes a shining beacon announcing I have stuff, come loot me when it gets bad. And I was visiting with an individual that had been to some of my classes some years ago. He was a very wealthy individual. He had a lot of money. He invited me up to his house and he was showing me around what he's done. And he had the theater and the swimming pool and all these things, which was great. But he also talked about his food storage and the greenhouse, the solar panels that he had. He had a 2,000-gallon propane tank. He could switch from natural gas to propane to run everything. He says, I can take care of my family without any outside support for 2 years. And I said, that's wonderful. And I'm going like, I wish I could do that. But then I also looked at him, and he's right in Orem, in a kind of exclusive area. And I said, how many other people in your neighborhood have made preparations to that level? He's like, I'm the only one that's done that. Nobody else has done that. And I said, okay, there you are in January. The lights are on, your house is warm, and you're doing everything, and all your neighbors are looking out at your house and seeing that. What are they going to do? He looked at me like, oh, so what are you going to do? Chase them all with a stick? Shoot them in the front lawn before they, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? Well, he had a big house. He could bring in a lot of people. Now his food supply isn't going to last that 2 years, and different kinds of things. He's going to bring in all the sick people. You need to think about some of those things, perhaps depending on where you live, it might be a problem for you. So I asked him, now what are you going to do? Okay, you got it for 2 years. Let's forget the social thing. I said, what are you going to do for year 3? And he just stared at me because as far as he's concerned, it could never last longer than 2 years. I'm here to tell you it certainly could. Now, that's pretty ugly to think about that, and we don't like to, but I can't promise you that it won't occur. So for the conventional American home, what is the most reliable solution for extended loss of utilities during the winter? That's what we want to look at here. So you have this real need to stay warm is what it comes down to. And frankly, you have been misled. You go to the preparedness shows, you go to the preparedness stores, and they sell you all these things, and you can buy the propane heaters and the radiant heaters. By the way, I have some of those things. I've got a bunch of them, and there's some of them, but you need to understand that this is a false idea of what it will do. This standard answer is not really real for long term. And you probably won't like this concept, but let me just lay it on the line here. I'm a bottom line kind of guy. So why it is taught to us the way it is, that you need to have this backup heat, is because, well, we want to maintain a normal lifestyle. I deserve my lifestyle. I've worked hard, so I want my normal lifestyle. I want my normal comfort. It's a generational habit in this country, and it is shared ignorance about what the problem is, what it could be, and we have backup heat. So you buy the stoves, the heaters, and those kinds of things. And we talk about those things. Now, by the way, I'm not saying you shouldn't have some of these things. I'm just saying if you're long-term dependent on them, there's only a very few people that can do that. Now, if you happen to live in a forest and around you are acres and acres of trees, hardwood, softwood, and what have you, and you've been cutting those things down and putting them in a barn, then you may have multiple cords of wood. You can do that. But for the average American, in even our little city here in Spring City, for these houses down here, we can't do it. That's the bottom line. We cannot do that for this community, even though you look around and say, look at all the trees, the forest. Long term, how long do those trees last? Oh, and by the way, where do you get the gasoline to drive your four-wheel pickup up there to take your chainsaw to cut those trees down in year 2 or 3? So, this is pretty extreme I'm talking about, but you need to understand if you want to be prepared for the worst, then this is what you deal with. So we look at this. This is actually one of the students. I was back up in upstate New York teaching back there, and one of the people who was attending my classes, he had a barn that is all hardwood. He lived on 10 acres, and he was cutting down trees all the time, the dead trees, and thinning them and what have you. He had all this wood in there, and he had 3 fireplaces in his house, and he heated with wood all the time anyway. He'll be okay. But he's only 1 in 300 million is what it comes down to that's going to be okay. Okay, so auxiliary heat for your house. What is the reality is what you have to think about. Well, consider this. Most households, even for short term. Now, what I mean short term is not 2 or 3 days. Let's say like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, how about a month? Auxiliary heat will not work for most people. They don't have the ability to do that. They're going to run out of propane, kerosene. They're going to run out of that 2 or 3 cords of wood if they're trying to maintain their lifestyle. So we think about this. For long term, this kind of auxiliary heat is impossible. And the question you have to ask is, now we take our houses right now, or the house that I have and other people have, and you say, okay, I want to maintain my house, my lifestyle in that house the way it is, 72 degrees in all the rooms in the house. How big is the pile of wood? How big of a pile of wood is it? Okay. It's bigger than the house is what it is. It honestly is. Do a heat balance on it. What does it take? We have this fabulous supply of natural gas, electricity, propane, and what have you that's very concentrated in energy that's delivered to us. And we can heat those big old houses. Of course, people around here will say, yeah, well, what about the pioneers? They heated their house with wood. Understand they had a house probably smaller than your kitchen, and they only heated it part of the time. My mother grew up, and part of her life was in South Dakota and North Dakota, and they heated the kitchen that was tied to the parlor and that. The rest of the home was unheated. Her bedroom upstairs was unheated. Some of the heat seeped up there. And in the morning, there was ice in the basin and things like that. That was the life. You went downstairs and got where the stove was. Now, if you think in terms of that lifestyle where you can heat maybe a small area in your house and you're prepared to do that, that might be doable for a longer period of time. But to maintain your house warm, you're not going to do it. That's my message. You see, your house doesn't care whether it's warm or cold. You just care if you're warm or cold. That's what it is. We don't care about the house. So, I mean, we care about the house because you care about the pipes and the goldfish and the plants. But the house, it's a convenient cultural habit that we have to have this warm house. So what it comes down to is we want you to be warm, not your house. What does that mean in the long run? Part of this message is, I didn't say don't have some auxiliary heat in a way to heat some things. But what I did say is you're not going to have a warm house, all those rooms to be warm, period. And if it goes long enough, you may have nothing but cold space. So for 24/7 long-term winter solution inside of your house, it is proper clothing. It's all about clothing. So what is clothing? Well, it's personal portable shelter. That's the definition I give that. It's you take with you. It's your shelter. It keeps you being protected from when you're outside, but it may also take care of you when you're inside. It's your first and most important line of weather protection. My message is one of hope. If somebody gets to talking about how bad it can really get long-term for months or years or what have you, most people say, well, we won't make it. I'll just die. That's a lousy attitude. I don't believe in having a lousy attitude. Here we go. Now, there are 2 situations to consider, and you want to be ready for both of them is what it comes down to, kind of with this clothing thinking. And we cover both of these. If you take care of both of these, and you've got everything covered in here. One of them is this. You say, well, normal shelter without utilities. Your house with windows and doors still in place. It's weather tight. You just don't have any heat for it. Or maybe you just heat one little room a little bit. Part of that article that I wrote was help people understand what you're really trying to do in this situation is what I'm trying to have is a less cold house. Leave warm out of it. What I want outside right now, what is it? It's probably 20 degrees right now outside. We're in this room, and here it's kind of chilly. This is a less cold place than outside there, right? This is a heck of a lot more comfortable. And in this room that is now maybe down into 65 degrees or whatever it is, this is easy compared to being outside. So what you want to do is have your secure place that you have that doesn't have any heat in it, which means you also want to be prepared. Well, if it was an earthquake and it broke some of your windows and doors, you want to have a way to repairing them. So this starts to spread out into your whole thinking. Inside temperatures are above zero. My house right now, if I had no utilities here in Spring City, my house will never go below zero as long as I have windows and doors. It will never go below zero. It's going to reach kind of the mean temperature between the high during the day and the low at night. Nighttime temperatures, I've seen 20 below zero at my house, but it never stayed below zero. It warmed up into the teens those days. So that house started warming back up. Plus, I have a bunch of thermal mass. And so it never got all that cold without utilities. So the inside temperature is going to be above zero is what it comes down. That's the easy one that you can do. Now, the exposed living outside extremes. This is about the precipitation, about the temperature, about the wind, about the time that you're out there. So if we say 24/7 without shelter or heat in temperatures of plus 20 or colder, that's more extreme. I've taught people for years how to go out and be at below zero without fire shelter. You can do that. I'm not trying to convince people to become extreme snow campers, but what I want you to understand is that you may be exposed to Arctic conditions for short periods of time. At temperatures of 0 degrees Fahrenheit with a little bit of wind, if you're stuck out in it for a few hours, if you don't have proper clothing, you're going to get hurt in a hurry. You can be dead within a few hours. So you want to pay attention to that one also, even though you say, well, I'm never going to go snow camping where the crazy guy in the front of the room goes. Okay. But understand that we want to take care of the worst case conditions because, well, things happen.
Now, this particular trip's turned out a little different than the other two you were on, hasn't it?
Yeah.
What's the difference?
Well, let's see. It's the 70-mile-an-hour winds and the blowing snow. Yeah, that's quite a bit different.
Any real misery or anything?
No, other than when you pull your hand out of your mittens, it's pretty darn cold fairly quickly. I mean, you got literally seconds. If the wind wasn't blowing, we probably, maybe you can do it 20, 30 seconds and not have any problem. This one, you pull your hand out and it's almost instantly hurting and you got to get it back in as fast as possible.
So would you come back again?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should other people come?
Oh yeah, everybody should experience this. You need to know that you can be okay even though it's unbelievable conditions, roads closed, snow blowing, and you're okay.
So here we have these extreme conditions of wind chills that are running 20, 30, maybe 40 below zero at times. So have you suffered on this trip?
I haven't. I'm still warm. I have warm feet. My hands, if I take my hands out of my mittens to do something, they'll get really cold because it is really, really cold here. But then when I put them back in the mittens, they warm back up. I'm not uncomfortable at all. It's been blowing like this for several hours. We've been out here. We had breakfast and we've just been sitting out here visiting and just watching the whiteout. There's been times where you can't see anything but white, and just very comfortable.
So do you think other people should do something like this?
Oh yeah, I think everybody should do it. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm not an extreme camper by any means. I'm a couch potato. I'm quite a wimp. I don't like to be cold. I don't like to be in pain, and I'm comfortable. And I think it's important to find out that if the conditions are really bad, you can be safe and you can be warm and comfortable. You don't have to suffer. This is amazing. It's an amazing system to be able to stay warm in such adverse conditions. I know at first I thought that you were just real tough, and I know now that's not true. You don't have to be tough to do this. It's easy to do as long as you follow the rules and do things right. you can be warm and actually comfortable, very comfortable in the clothing.
Well, there's Garth.
Hello.
How are you doing in the middle of this blizzard?
This is wonderful. It's cold and breezy, but I'm not cold. I'm nice and warm.
What is suffering on you?
What is suffering?
Yeah, any suffering out here?
Nothing suffering. I'm just fine.
And you slept right outside last night?
Yeah, I just laid it on the snow, and it was a nice evening. It's a good experience to experience this wind. I'd never experienced that before. But now I know I can do it. My core is warm. All of me is warm, really.
How have your feet been doing?
They're great. They haven't even been cool. So,
you know, in these kinds of conditions, you're supposed to be suffering with your feet.
Yeah, well, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to, I guess.
You're breaking the rules.
No, I'm keeping the real rules.
Ah, that's the way it is, isn't it? So, is this something you think other people should do?
Definitely.
Why?
It's a wonderful experience. It's very empowering to know that you can actually enjoy being out in something like this. It's not something to fear. It's just something to prepare for, and then you know you can do it.
These kinds of conditions are interesting because they're so different.
They are.
We usually go inside and hide from the blizzard, but here we are right out in it. So we don't hide from it, we stay in it because we're prepared.
That's true, and preparation is the key here. Just to be ready for it, and then you can deal with it.
You know, I hear it roaring out there again, and it's really...
It is roaring. In fact, I don't know if you can see me because of the snow blowing by. But this is a wonderful thing to see, to be able to see it and be okay. It's gorgeous to see this. A new experience.
Because we just don't normally do this. This is odd.
Oh no, people would be crazy to do this if they didn't have the system that we have.
So why clothing? Well, because things happen no matter where you are, and it's portable. You take it with you. You have it at home, you have it in the bush, you have it on the road. Things happen just because they do. So that's why we focus on clothing, even though you may think I'll never really find myself out there because I know better than that. That young lady that's walking away from that car in those temperatures where the wind is blowing right there. Now, she probably doesn't have too far to go. She'll be okay, but she's going to be miserable in there. Then we get the road shut down for, a few days. People have been stranded in cars for a few days. Well, you need to be prepared to do that. I always have stuff in my car, so if I get stuck, I just turn it into time to relax and read one of my books or read an audio book or something. And then we have some other hazards here. This is one that gets people every year. We're going to kill a half a dozen people in their automobiles because of the exhaust, because they didn't have clothing and they're dependent on keeping their car warm with that heater running so that they're not going to be miserable. So carry some stuff with you is what it comes down to. Think of that structure. See, inside that car, it's weather tight. The windows are all rolled up and what have you. The wind can't blow through it. You just need to be able to take care of staying warm inside of that space with some blankets, sleeping bags, clothing. By the way, sleeping bags, nighttime clothing is all that it is. Sleeping bags, nighttime clothing. That's what it is. It's clothing you put on at night. This is not a theory, what I'm telling you about. And I know there's some people that have been to my classes and some of these things before. You've seen me talk about clothing. I'm not going to go into all of the details of this, but I want you to understand this is very, very doable. And my mission is to reach and teach as many people as possible about winter, and it's not an enemy, whether you're out in it or whether you're at home and you have no utilities. This is based on more than, it's now 65 years of personal experience being out there. My first snow camp, age 10, 1957, when my parents decided they wanted to go snow camping. Oh man, pain. That was bad. And we were doing it the woodsman way, the white man way, with the fire and the tarps and the blankets and all these kinds of things, trying to be in the shelters in there. We started getting better at doing it on snowshoe trips and camping and just going all the time, again and again. Every year we had several snow camps. Then we could get on snowshoes and go higher, colder, longer, because we were getting better at it. but we were still suffering in the early days. You got better at doing what everybody else does. And then we diverged away from that to start doing things that allowed me by 1967, from 1962, when we started doing things with the foam, by 1967, I was able to stand on a mountain peak at below zero and high winds. Then a little bit later was actually above the Arctic Circle in 1968 also. Up there, my dad and I, two weeks we camped up there. The highest temperature we saw was 10 below zero. The coldest was 30 below zero. Heck, we've been in the Rockies where it was 40 below zero. We were colder temperatures there. But it was a cold soak. This is what was unique. It was constantly below zero. Most people don't experience that. And some other places I've gone because I can. I want to experiment. I want to understand doing all these kinds of things in Arctic conditions. Again, you don't have to be an Arctic snow camper. Just understand there's some things you need to understand and be able to do it and take care of yourself. People say, well, I'm really not too worried about this because I never get cold. I've got it covered with what I have all this winter stuff. When I go on the elk hunt and the deer hunt, what have you, I've been out there and I'll just beef up my layers. But if you're like, I'm tired of being cold or I want to be prepared when things are really, really severe. I'm just talking about no utilities all winter long. Then maybe there's some things you need to learn about. People have winter clothing, but they still get wet. They get cold. How long can you stay out? How long can you be exposed without utilities? What are you going to do without heat or shelter? Well, I tell people right now, this is the time of the year when you do your tests. You say, I've got it covered. Then what I want you to do is get out the lawn chair, go outside, put on your clothing. I didn't say get in a tent. I said, put on your clothing, sit out there for a few hours, take a headlamp, read a book out there. If you can sit sedentary in your winter clothing and it's, 20 degrees, 15 degrees, 0 degrees, and you're out there for 3, 4, 5 hours and nothing gets cold, you're on the right track because now you can take care of yourself inside your house. But if you sit out there and after 15 minutes, your feet are freezing or something else is cold, admit you have a problem. You can't take care of yourself. You need to learn a few things. That's what I do, where I spend my time. It's about these experiences, the things that we call PALS, which is the Phillips Arctic Living System. It was named by a retired general, as he named it for us when I was working with the military, teaching them and everything. He wanted to call it a friendly name. It's PALS, Phillips Arctic Living System. I'm not going to put you into the mountains, although I like to, and it's a lot of fun to do that. You don't have to get on the mountain peaks out there, but it would be fun to do that. I spent a lot of time training a lot of people in here, including Jim Lovell, Apollo 13 commander for a private winter camp at the North Pole. What he told me, he says, I circled the Earth many times. He was on the Gemini missions, on the Apollo missions out there, and he said, I always wanted to circle the Earth faster than 90 minutes. So he said, I'm going to go there at the North Pole and plant a stick, and I'm going to walk around that stick. So I've beaten my own record orbiting the Earth. Well, that was his joke about why he wanted to go, because he could. So we outfitted and trained him, and he went with our clothing and our system up there. There's been some other things out there, articles written and what have you. But it's about teaching people to use some materials you don't normally use. I've been doing this since the 60s. Teaching people and hundreds of people to make things that they can make and or buy them if you find it that's being made properly. But a lot of people say, oh, gee, that stuff's kind of expensive, $300, $400, $500. I need to outfit 10 people. Hey, I'll teach you how to make your own and just put your time into it. You can do that. I want you to understand that winter snow and cold weather can be an ally rather than a threat. That little formula down that I teach in my classes, which is K equals I times E, K, knowledge, equals information multiplied by experience. You need to get the information that you're being taught and the theories and things, then you need to go experience it. Remember that sitting out there in that lawn chair right there? You think you have the theory that your clothing is good, go prove it. How about your sleeping bag? Well, I got a really good 40 below zero sleeping bag. Yeah, you ought to try that thing at 10 below. See how they really work. That's always kind of a hoot. So anyway, you need to gain the experience with things and then know that you know. Now, this is more about not just being comfortable. There are many, many benefits to the cold weather and winter. When properly prepared for the cold and extreme conditions, understand this. you have the availability of water in the winter in most places. Some of the places that I've gone in the winter up on these mountain peaks and things like that, in the summer, you got to haul all that water up there at 8.5 pounds a gallon if I'm going to stay up there. But if I've got snow in the winter, I can go up on top of those peaks. I'll have to turn it into water, but that's easy to do by some simple methods, so that the availability of water around you or outside your house. You don't have the electric stove, the gas is off in those things. You need to produce some water. Well, it's all out there. It's laying around you. Now, if you have a simple way to heat that water, which, by the way, will act as a little bit of auxiliary heat, but we're not going to heat your house. We're going to make some water because it's extremely important for you to stay hydrated. That's another message you need to understand. By the way, there are not very many street people that are going to be showing up in the Yukon. The Harleys are not going to roll into town up there. They're going to be headed for Tucson in the winter. They're not going to be headed for up here in the winter because they don't want to be cold. So it gets rid of some of the roving gangs and street people that go into the cold places. But the other thing is that there's no flies and mosquitoes and other insects. They're gone in the winter. You know, the bears are hibernating and things like that. So there's some advantages to it, but it's mainly the flies and mosquitoes and insects. They're all gone. Now, here's one that's a little bottom line kind of gnarly. When it's cold, and if we have something that's very, very severe and long-term, there will be a lot of things die. 4-legged, 8-legged, no-legged, 2-legged. And one of the things about bodies and carcasses is they decay in the warmth. So this gives you a chance to take care of some of these issues. And I don't mean to be too bleak about this kind of stuff, but it's a reality that the cold is one of the ways that when you take a look at the disasters that happen in the tropics where they kill hundreds of people on the beach and then around in there, they got to get those bodies underground fast because the disease that'll spread is a real problem. So that's one of the things that adds a little safety to it. Here's another one that's very interesting. This stops the spread of sickness and disease. Now, not if you go down to the shelter where you got 5,000 other sick people and they're sneezing on each other, spread. That's where you don't want to be. When we have things shut down, then what I want to do is I'm going to go to my cold house that's not going to be heated and lit. Nobody wants to come there because it's not warm. So they're going to go someplace where it's warm. I'm going to keep myself warm inside of my shelter. And you will not get sick because it's going to float through the air. Now, some of the bacteria and viruses, they may in fact be airborne, but if you live in an igloo or in a snow camp out there, you can have somebody around you that's sick, as long as you don't kiss them, okay? Don't shake hands with them. That disease will not spread through the cold air. It dies. It'll die in your house too. So you can quarantine yourself. So there's some advantages to the cold, and we could spend a lot of time talking about some of these things. I just want to give you the idea that maybe you want to learn some things that you're not being taught. People don't talk about these things. Okay, last little thing is getting close to the end here that I promised to talk about. Hydration. Now, we mentioned that water is so critically important, and it's going to be available to you in the winter in most places because now you got snow. Even if the pipes are dry and what have you, got snow around you that you can find. But what you need to understand is that dehydration in the cold is very serious, and it's little recognized because dehydration is the primary trigger to hypothermia in the cold. And people don't realize that. They realize, well, these people, they died of hypothermia, they froze to death, exposure and what have you. What they don't recognize is, now, if you're out there in a bathing suit and flip-flops at 20 below zero, you're going to die of hypothermia, period. But if you're reasonably well dressed, and even if you're wearing this Arctic clothing that I talk about, I can sit on a stump at 40 below zero and not get cold day after day. I can be out there below zero in my clothing. But if I become dehydrated, I will go into hypothermia within about 10 hours and shortly after that die. If I'm at below zero, I have to be consuming water because it's water that fuels the furnace, keeps everything working, so to speak. Okay, so this is about ignorance and arrogance. Particularly for guys. You know, we're tough. I've been thirsty before. I'll just keep going. And you get all the chapped lips and you lose energy and what have you. I'll just keep going. Arrogant and ignorance. It's not recognized as one of the key symptoms and or that dehydration is leading to hypothermia. You wonder what's going on. Why are you cold? I've had a lot of people when they've been at my snow college, SNO college, snow college. We take them out there and put them in very harsh environments. And I've had one of them wake up in the night and say, I have all this clothing on and I should be warm. I'm dressed for 40, 50 below zero, and it's 0, 10 degrees and I'm chilly. And then he remembers the stories that I tell them. I'm going to tell you here in just a minute because I want you to remember this. He remembered, one of the reasons we take our water bottles to bed is so that we can drink in the night, because you have a tendency to dehydrate. When you dehydrate, you start getting cold. So he just drank down a pint of water or something like that. A little bit later, he just warmed right up. When you're dehydrated, you're going to feel cold, and it can lead to hypothermia. When you don't understand the physical processes that are involved in this dehydration, that's part of the problem, because you dehydrate more quickly in the winter than you do in the summer. We don't recognize that because of ignorance. People will say, well, it's not, I'm not sweating all that heavily. It's cold and I'm not perspiring. You're losing a huge amount of water in the winter that is not recognized. And what happens is, now that you're not recognizing it, you're getting into hypothermia. Now your strength is going away. You're under emotional stress and different things like that. And you can slip into not recovery. And the recovery is very slow when you become dehydrated in the winter. Let me explain to you this thing about dehydration in the winter. We think in terms of, well, we use water in our metabolical processes. And if you learn nothing else in this class tonight, you need to learn this. This about hydration is so critically important, because you can get yourself in trouble very quickly by becoming dehydrated, even though you have some pretty good clothing or sleeping bags. So we use maybe more calories because we're trying to stay warm. So we may be eating more. We're working heavily. If you're on snowshoes going up a hill with a pack on your back, you're going to really burn some serious calories then. You're also going to be burning some more water. Water is a part of that digestion and circulation that's important. But the thing that you don't understand is, when you're in the cold, and we've all seen it, what do you see when you exhale? You see that cloud of vapor. That is water coming right from your blood supply through the lung tissues right into the outside air, because one of the laws of physics, you need to understand the physical laws and the laws of physiology. I'm giving you part of that right now. Laws of physics say that water will move from where it is warm to where it's cold. Didn't say it might or it's going to. I said it will move. It's a law. From where it's warm to where it's cold. Inside of you darn well better be warm inside there if you're proper temperature. 98.6, your blood's nice and warm. That water in your blood is nice and warm. It has a very high vapor pressure compared to outside where the temperatures are below zero. You inhale that cold air inside. It picks up, because now it has the ability to absorb more water, and it'll blow it out in there, and you can breathe away a half a gallon to a gallon of water a day. And if you don't make up for that, you will become dehydrated, go into hypothermia, and die, or at least be cold. You dehydrate rapidly in the winter. People are running around with chapped lips in the winter all the time, smearing gookum on them. What I tell my students is, drink more water. Just drink a lot more water. Drink more water than you think you ever want to drink. Drink before you get thirsty. By the time you're thirsty, by the way, when you feel thirsty, you're already 3% low in your water. On the average, you're 3% low by body weight. And when you're 3% low on water, you're actually in physical stress and you're losing part of your work capacity. It takes a while to rehydrate, so stay hydrated. That's the whole point. People are chronically dehydrated, and they just do not understand or appreciate the ramifications. Now, here's the story that I tell, because I want you to understand how serious this is. This picture is taken in 1973 outside of Blackfoot, Idaho. I had a Boy Scout troop when I was up there, and this is the troop. When I have a Boy Scout troop, just as my father, what we always do is we take survival trips. We don't talk about survival. We don't pretend survival, do it in the backyard. We go out and we actually do it. And we always typically want to do it kind of in the fall, either in severe conditions in the summer and or in the fall. And in the fall, if you go into the mountains, you get some berries and things like this. And it's a little bit chilly, so the wilderness beds, you can tell that they work. You have to have fire and things. You don't take any specialized clothing, just your regular, clothing, maybe a pair of long johns if it's a little colder, and you have your coat and your hat, flint and steel, and a 2-pound coffee can, and a pocket knife. That's it. And your coat. Here, this is my little troop right here, these boys. Now, I was out at the National Reactor Testing Station. I was a reactor operator instructor out there. And my schedule was rotating shifts, and I was having a hard time making it all, fit up with the the weekend, the Friday, Saturday, so we could go out there with these boys. So it get putting off. We were going to do it in late September, then October into November, and it just wasn't working. But we're going to go. So finally, here we are. It's like the first week of December, and I finally got the schedule lined up, and we're going to go. And the parents are all aware of that. And then they started calling me because the weather forecasters out of Idaho Falls on the radio and on the nightly news were saying the Yukon Express is on the way. It's going below zero this weekend. So I was getting calls from the parents about, are you still going to go? Yes, we are. We're going to go. And they're a little nervous about it. The reason you don't bail when the weather gets bad is, what do I teach those boys? I teach them, hey, when it gets tough, just give up. I'm not going to teach any boy to do that. We're going to go. Now, we're going to adjust how we're going to go. We're not going to be foolish, but we're still going to adjust how we go. Because I was getting my pilot's license, I was flying across that desert out there. That's the lava flow halfway between Idaho Falls and Blackfoot. And I saw there's actually a surprising amount of wood out there. So when I looked at it, I said, yeah, I'll bet we can find some shelter, and I'll bet we can find a whole bunch of wood out there. The cedar trees and the sagebrush and other things out there. So we're out there a couple miles into that. I found this cave out there, and I send these boys out to get a monstrous pile of wood. They thought I was crazy. Now, I know it's going below zero. Now, that night, by the way, in Idaho Falls, it was 25 below zero. In Blackfoot, it was 20 below zero. So we were halfway in between. So it was somewhere between 20, 25 below zero that night. We have no sleeping bags, no tents, no specialized clothing, no foam clothing, nothing, just regular boots and socks and those things. But we have fire. Fire is the big mitigator. We have a little bit of shelter there. It's dead calm, no wind, and we have fire. But the other thing we have that's really important, you see that snow in those pictures? That's critically important. And those tin cans, that's so those boys can melt snow and drink lots of water. I'm going to push water on them like crazy because they've got to stay hydrated. Now they're in the see right down in the front. That's little John. Now John with that cap on right there. He's one of those really active kids. He's bouncing off the walls all the time, jittering and talking and up and moving around and jumping around, everything. John's starting to get real quiet. Now we have this fire going. We're melting snow all the time. I'm teaching the principles of drinking water, drink water, drink water. And I see little John's getting real quiet. So I know he's getting cold. I know, and he's a small kid, so they chill out pretty quickly. And I know that he's going into hypothermia. So I approached John and I said, John, are you drinking? Yeah, I'm drinking. It's okay. So, you trust him to a point. But I'm now watching him. He's got his can over there. He stirs it every now and then, but he never takes a drink. I catch him not drinking. I see the other boys drinking, and I'm talking. He's not drinking. So I keep talking to him, and I say, I can't see you drink. I've drunk. I had this, so I know he's not drinking. So finally, I confront him. I say, John, you're not drinking. I'm watching you. You see, law of stewardship has been transferred to me. Those parents transferred the stewardship of those children to me. I've been given the authority to take care of them, have the responsibility to them. And my accountability is not going to be very good if I bring one back in a body bag. So I have the stewardship to take care of them. So finally, John is telling me, I see him. I said, you're not drinking, John. He says, no, it's got smoke in it. It tastes smoky. It's got ashes in it. I'm not going to drink. You're not my dad. You can't make me drink. Well, end of discussion. Stewardship kicks in. So I just before he does it, I just grab him by the shoulder, boom, down on the ground. And I kneeled across his arms there, and I'm sitting on top of him. And little Steve Park, he's the one that's that in the blue coat over there, all the way to the right. That's Steve Park. I said, Steve, bring me that water. Now all these kids are looking at Phillips is going to kill John. Their eyes are big, and they're staring at me like, oh my heck, Scoutmaster went rogue. So he brought it over to me. I have this, and now, by the way, when you pry their mouth open, here's experience. When you pry their mouth open, do it with a stick, not your finger. Little bounders will bite you. Okay. I pry his mouth open, get my thumb in the corner, and I'm pouring water down his throat. Now he's coughing and sputtering and choking and shaking, and I'm getting him wet. He got the message. He will drink, or I will drown him in the process. He said, I'll drink. You promise I'll drink. So I watched him. I poured in him this 2 quarts of water. Everybody came back. Nobody suffered other than they're cold. We're cold part of the time. We have fire. I bring them all back. That's how important it is. If you have to use violence to get somebody to drink water, if you have a stewardship for them, you do that because you must stay hydrated, or John would have suffered hypothermia serious, may have had frostbite and those things. We'd been trying to rescue him in the night. I want you to remember how critically important it is. Now, winter happens. Are you going to be ready for it? Make all these provisions for all the things in your life you need to do, because if you do, then you can face the future with hope and confidence, even if it's like, we could lose our utilities for months or a year or so. I'm prepared for it, so it'll be kind of an adventure. Doesn't make it easy, doesn't even make it fun, but it'll be okay, and you'll be okay. So I want you to understand that's why these principles are so critically important. It's about what you know is more important. And I've given you some key principles here, but just a few minutes of them. There's hours and hours. In fact, the one course that I teach, which is Winter Without Worries, it's over 20 hours long. And it's Winter Without Worries, 20 hours or more. And I'm teaching it right now online. Anyway, this is about a preparedness lifestyle, which I call provident living. That's what I prefer to call it, just living providently, making provisions for the future. And understand that you can learn all the things you need to learn. There's a lot of people teaching some good things, and that's part of my profession. That's what I do. My website, which is jimsway.com. You can go there. You can. I know some of the people on this are already registered there, getting the newsletter that I send out every week, and come to the classes. I do classes on Wednesday nights, and some other classes like Thursday nights occasionally. Saturday mornings, I'm always online for people to ask questions. So you may want to go there. I have lots of free classes online on my website, jimsway.com, in the library. I also, and there's links on there that you can find worth link out to YouTube, where there's a bunch of things talking about those things. There's this article I told you about that you link to that. So you can read what did I have to say about people that are unprepared. But if you know what to do, if you understand the principles, you can actually do things, even though you're someplace where you haven't made provisions for that. So you can learn how to do those things. And then I teach these classes. I have some other special things that I do for people. There's the this DVD. I used to sell DVDs. I don't do that anymore. This one's online. It's in the library in there. This is an overview to the clothing and to winter. Correct Clothing is Personal Portable Shelter. Online in the library. You can just go watch that for free. Over 2 hours of that. I have some others that are in a premium library in there. The Winter Safety Made Real. And then this one that I'm doing right now, which is Winter Without Worries. This is that long course. It's teaching about how to do these things, digging into the nutrition, all these kinds of things, more on the water and those things, along with making the clothing. And or what if you don't have foam clothing? Well, here's how to properly use your layers. I don't teach layers per se as the best way to go, but if you're stuck with layers, there's a better way to use them than some of the things you're being taught. Other advantages if you're taking that class, that means you're a member of the library that's in there. You can join that. It's $5.95 a month. You can join it 1 month and drop out if you want to watch things and then get out of there. But it helps pay for all this hobby that I have that's teaching these classes and doing things. But I also entice people to do some other things. This Civil Defense Manual, Volume 1 and Volume 2, that's almost 1,000 pages. Jack Lawson wrote that. Some of you may be familiar with one of his books, which was the Loss of Civility. He and another author wrote that one. He did this one here. He asked me to write a chapter in there on hypothermia. But that book for members on this, that book sells online for, I think it's $94 in some sense. I sell it at my cost, which is $30 off. So you can get that book as a member. So you join for 1 month, save the $30. And so you can buy that book and have that if you want to do that. Save some money just by being a member. I started on a course some 60 years ago that brought me to here and now, to this time and place where I can sit and visit with you for just a moment. Sometimes people ask, what is it that I do? What's this all about? I believe that we're in the business of hope. What would I mean by that? Well, fear steals hope. And I believe it's about being able to face the future without fear, no matter what happens. I call this the law of provident living. And I believe that's right at the core, at the very heart of what we do, what we teach, and how we help people face the future without fear. You see, this is the simple 4 points. Number one, and I like to use key words on this. Number one is spiritual.
And by that I mean that there's more to you than meets the eye, more depth of character, capacity, possibility, future. And you have to take care of that first and above everything else. Number two is the one that makes the difference between whether you live or die. When it really, really gets bad, and it couldn't get any worse, number two is what will carry you through. And that's attitude. Key word is attitude. Now, how do you develop an attitude that says, I will be okay no matter what? It's number three on my list, very simply, which is knowledge. Now, knowledge is not something we can share. I can't share any knowledge with you. The only thing I share is information. So let me define knowledge for you. It is information multiplied by experience. My job is to help you get true, correct, credible, proper information and then motivate you to get some experience with it. Then it becomes knowledge, something that can't be taken away from you. And then number four on the list is stuff, the material things. The proper order is spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and then the material things. And when you put those together in that order, you can face the future without fear. I don't believe that I have the right to teach something I haven't lived. I believe that you have to know, and I can look at people and tell you I know, I've been there. Now, I haven't done everything. There's still a whole bunch more things to do and experience, and I look forward to that. Life is this wonderful adventure of experiences. Well, here's my closing thought. You see, there's no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there's no dispute that things happen. But how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. And you see, I believe that our lives were created to be grand adventures of learning, growth, development, change, becoming more than we were in the beginning. That's why I do what I do. I share what I share. That's what hope is all about.
Let's go to some question and answers right now for a few moments. And I will just stay here as long as you want to ask online or in person and answer them. And then if you want to, come to my Saturday morning class. The link is in the newsletter. And I spend as much time as we need right there to answer questions. Sometimes people say, well, what you want to do is put cayenne pepper in your socks so that it'll increase the circulation into your feet. If you understand how the physiology, the body works, when your core is becoming chilly, let me define core for you. Core is from the top of your head to the middle of your thighs. Everything in between it excludes your lower legs and your arms. Everything else is core. It's not just the internal organs. That is core, top of your head to the middle of your thighs. When that is toasty warm and comfortable, doesn't feel a chill inside or outside, you have full circulation into your hands and feet. Now, when the core starts to become chilled a little bit, the body doesn't like that. So what it starts to do is going to withdraw the blood supply. It's going to restrict the blood supply that goes into your fingers, toes, hands, and feet. That's why your feet are getting cold, even though you may have insulated boots on and things like that, is the blood supply is being restricted because the body says, I need to conserve the heat for the brain and the heart and the internal organs and the whole body in there. But I can let the hands and feet freeze. Forget them. Let them freeze off. So that's what happens is the body starts to restrict the blood supply to the extremities. Now, here's the story about the cayenne pepper. You can buy some insoles that have cayenne in them. It helps your feet stay warm. But think what you just did. Think of the electrician that tags out a breaker because he's going to be working on the line over there and he doesn't want that breaker flipped because he get electrocuted. He puts a red tag on it. You come along and pull the red tag off and flip the switch. Well, you just fried a guy. Now, your body is like that. It has all these automatic systems in it. One of them it does is, I just gave it to you. The core is starting to get chilly. It's going to protect the internal organs, the brain and everything. So I'm going to stop the blood supply going to my fingers and toes, hands and feet. When you put cayenne in your socks to warm your feet up, what did you just do? You just sucked warmth out of your brain and the rest of your body. So there's all kinds of little nuances like this. So when you understand, see, when I talk about Phillips Arctic Living System, it's a system, clothing, hydration, nutrition, shelter, working with the snow, all of these things all together that would allow you to live below zero 24/7 without fire, without shelter. You can do that, not that you need to. Just understand some of these rules so you can take care of yourself when you don't have any utilities. Any other question or comment? Or everybody's either like, oh my heck, that was too much. I just drank from a fire hose, which I realized that was a lot. I trying to synopsize a very overview to a course to tell you how serious this is, how important it is. And hopefully a few of you may understand that, like, we're probably sometime going to lose our utilities for a period of time in the winter. Gee, maybe I better get ready.
Barbara, you unmuted for a minute. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, this is Chuck, actually. I was wondering if, that's okay. I was wondering if this recording was going to be made available. I would love to share it with my family.
I'm recording it. The equivalents of this on my website where you can watch them there. There are several of them on there. But this one I am recording, and I'll give it to the Citizen Corps, and they'll have it. They don't have a website right now to put it on, but it'll be available. In fact,
Thank you, Jim.
I can put it on I'll put it on my website, as well as this class right here that I told you about, the correct clothing as personal portable shelter. That's in that same library. It's under clothing is where you'll find it. And there's others in there about winter and cold weather and things. They're all free classes. Anything else anybody have? Yes, Pam.
No. Do you need to boil it before you drink it, or how do you?
Okay. The question is on sanitizing water out in the snow. Well, it depends on where you are. If I'll say way out in the wilderness or up in the mountains a long ways out, and the chance of contamination is very, very low. Now, because there's so many treks on Mount Everest right now, that snow is laced with giardia. You have to purify the water up there. On our mountain peaks out here, I'm out away from things, and I don't bother. I just melt it and drink it. Now, if I was in an area where there was lots of pollution that may be blowing in from a city or something like that, you might choose to want to do a little bit of filtering or what have you. But in the areas where I've gone, I've never had to bother about, doing anything with water. And if in doubt, from a biological standpoint, you boil water, and when you boil water, when you get it up to 180 degrees and hold it for a few minutes, that kills all the microbial life that would be in that water. So that's what's really great about it. Now, by the way, somebody will say, well, okay, if you don't have a stove to mount your snow, how do you do that? See, because I said I can live no fire, no shelter below zero. If the clothing is proper, in other words, if you have the PALS level of clothing of insulation, where I can sit on a stump at 40 below zero and not get cold. And if I don't have water, I'm going to go into hypothermia. So what do I have to do? So if I was in that situation, I have enough body heat because I'm not losing it through my hands, my feet, or anything. I'm covered from head to foot to an extreme level. I can melt snow with body heat. Now, there's a technique you have to use. I won't go into it here, but you've got to get ahead of the curve because you've got to get the heat transfer into that bladder that's right next to your skin in there. Hey, my problem is when I'm out there in the wilderness, if it's 20 below zero and I'm wearing the clothing I'm having to vent a little bit anyway, so I can just stuff some snow inside my shirt in a bag, and it'll help keep me cool, so it's not a problem. So I can do that when you know the techniques that you can live no fire, no shelter below zero. It's really easy. My problem is, a lot of people, they go camping in the winter and they're like, oh man, I'm struggling to stay warm. During the day, the temperature's 20 degrees. You're out there on your snow camp or what have you. And the sun's going to go down behind the mountain and it's going to get cold on these trips where we take people. The daytime temperatures may be reasonably pleasant, sunny, 15 degrees, but it's going to go behind that ridge and the temperature is going to plummet. Well, normally what people are thinking like, oh man, the sun's going to go down. I'm going to be freezing. I'm thinking like, boy, I'm glad that sun's going to go down, so I'll dry out. If you're working heavily in the snow and sweating, laws of physics, the colder it is outside, the faster any of that sweat will come out of your body. But when you do clothing properly, the way we do it is you self-dry very rapidly. I did the original ice plunge back in 1984 through a hole in the ice with my PALS clothing, spent the night, no fire, no shelter, no change of clothing, and self-dried. Yes, after I sat in the water for 15 minutes, drove myself into hypothermia. Now, I don't recommend you do that. It's a stupid thing to do, and it hurts, by the way. This is not a cold weather exposure suit, and it hurts. But by morning, and by the way, nighttime clothing is a sleeping bag. I got in my foam sleeping bag that's made the same way the clothing is with my wet clothing, and in the morning I was dry. That's the laws of physics, moving water from where it's warm to where it's cold, just pouring out of that thing, literally as a vapor, comes out as a vapor. Now I was dry in the morning. So we do things that are counterintuitive. So you can go to my website, register for the newsletter if you want to get that coming to you, and come to the classes. And by the way, right now I'm teaching the Winter Without Worries class, actually on my Wednesday night classes. I'm teaching it, but I'm not putting it in the Wednesday night. It's as soon as I edit it, put it together, it goes into the members' libraries where the rest of it is. So I'm doing that in a series right now to get it done. So thank you very much for being here this evening. I appreciate the opportunity to share, help my neighbors be ready to deal with things that may happen around us.